My wife held the package out without looking at me. Just a plastic-wrapped bundle dangling from 2 fingers while her eyes looked past my shoulder at someone else. I opened it in front of everyone. A pair of cheap fabric socks. $6.99. A red clearance sticker still on the tag. And just across the room on the wrist of the man she had been sleeping with for 8 months was the $14,000 watch she had personally chosen, personally wrapped, and handed to him like it was a sacred offering. The exact watch I had once mentioned as the gift I wanted for my 50th birthday. The entire room went silent. Not one word from anyone. Then she leaned close to my ear, close enough that only I could hear, and said one sentence I will carry with me for the rest of my life. You know why, don't you? I looked at her face. And what I found there wasn't guilt. It wasn't cruelty. It was something worse than both of those things combined. It was certainty. She had planned this. I smiled. I thanked her. I held those socks in my hands like a man who had just heard exactly what he needed to hear. My name is Thomas. I am 54 years old. And before 5 o'clock that morning, I was gone, and I had left something under that Christmas tree that made her scream when she found it. Stay with me until the end, because what happened next she never saw coming. But to understand what happened that night, you need to understand who Vivian was before she became the woman standing in that ballroom. Because she wasn't always that person. And honestly, that made it so much harder. I met Vivian Caldwell in 2001 at a design firm on the near North Side. She was the sharpest person in every room she entered, not in an aggressive way, but in the way of someone who simply sees things others miss. Patterns in chaos. Decisions others took weeks to reach, she arrived at in hours. I fell in love with her clarity before I fell in love with anything else. But I also fell in love with the private version of her, the woman who cried at airport farewells, who kept every card I ever gave her in a shoebox under the bed, who made genuinely terrible coffee every morning but kept trying because she knew it mattered to me. That woman was real. I need you to know that. Over 23 years, her company Meridian Solutions, a health tech firm she'd co-founded in a Wicker Park co-working space, grew from 12 people to over 400, with its headquarters in a glass tower on South Wacker Drive. I watched every stage of that growth from the inside. I helped carry it. I shifted my own architecture consulting to part-time, when she needed more from home. I hosted her board members at our Andersonville house while she was still upstairs changing. I drafted pitch decks at midnight and pretended I hadn't when she mentioned them the next morning. I did all of this gladly. I want to be clear about that. I did it gladly, because I believed in her, and I believed that what we were building together was worth the sacrifice. The mistake I made was never stopping to ask whether she still believed the same thing. Sometime in the past year, Vivian had changed in ways I cataloged without meaning to. A new way of tilting her head when she smiled at her phone. A new perfume she'd bought without mentioning it. A low-grade irritability toward me that had no specific source, no fight, no incident, just a coolness, like standing next to an open freezer in a room where everything else was warm. I told myself it was the pressure of record-breaking growth numbers. I told myself a lot of things. The party was on a Friday. Vivian arrived beside me and separated from me almost immediately. She moved toward the crowd the way a ship finds its current naturally, inevitably. I found myself at the bar nursing a whiskey, watching people come alive in her orbit. I recognized most faces. Department heads I'd fed dinner to. Investors I'd made easy conversation with for years. People whose children's names I remembered better than they remembered mine. A woman named Lorraine from compliance came over and touched my shoulder. "Tom, I genuinely don't know how you manage it," she said softly. "Supporting Vivian through all this. You must be exhausted." I gave her the answer I always gave. "You get used to it." She smiled at me the way people smile at funerals, careful, soft, full of something they won't say. I watched Vivian across the room. She was laughing near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, her hand resting on Nathan Yee's forearm as she spoke. Nathan was her executive assistant, 29, fast-talking, always dressed in a way that made the senior staff quietly uncomfortable. He'd joined Meridian 2 years earlier, and had become indispensable with a speed that unsettled people who'd been there a decade longer. I had tried not to notice the specific quality of light on Vivian's face when she looked at him at company dinners. I had tried very hard. The gift exchange was Vivian's idea this year. She'd never cared about it before. I had purchased a set of generic gift cards for her to distribute. She'd been too busy to shop, she'd said, But when she reached under the decorated tree in the corner of the venue, she pulled out a long navy case I had never seen. The kind of case that comes from a boutique where they pour champagne before showing you anything. "Nathan," she said. Her voice had that warm, private quality it used to have with me. She walked to him with the case held out like something precious. The room quieted the way rooms do when they sense something worth watching. Nathan opened the case and lifted out a watch, an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, its face catching the chandelier light like something alive. Someone near me murmured the price. $14,000. He looked at it, then at her, then back at it. "Vivienne, this is I can't. You've earned far more than this," she said. The room applauded. Someone whistled. Vivienne smiled at Nathan with her whole face open, radiant, present in a way I hadn't seen directed toward me in longer than I could comfortably name. I stood very still. Honestly, if this were happening to a friend of mine standing in that room, if I were watching from the outside, I would have put my hand on their shoulder and said, "Let's go." But you don't do that when it's your own life. You stand there, and your hands are steady, and 23 years of being the calm one doesn't just switch off because your chest has gone hollow. Then Vivienne turned and looked at me. "Tom," she called out across the room. "Come here." She reached under the tree again. This time she pulled out a small package drugstore paper. No bow, no ceremony. She held it out and waited, so I had to cross the room to take it from her hand in front of everyone I knew. I opened it. Black dress socks, still in the plastic sleeve. Price tag still on. $6.99. With a clearance sticker read, 30% off. The silence that followed was not polite. It was the silence of a room full of people deciding where to look that wasn't at me. She leaned close. "We both know why," she whispered. I looked at her face, and what I found there was not anger, not cruelty. What I found was calm, settled, decided. This moment had been planned, not in a heat of emotion, but in something colder and more deliberate than that. "Thank you," I said. Very thoughtful. She turned back toward Nathan, and I stood in the middle of a $1,400 a night rooftop with a pair of clearance socks in my hands, while every person who had ever sat at my dinner table processed what they had just witnessed. If you have ever been in a room where someone looked right through you, not with hatred but with indifference, then you already understand something that's nearly impossible to put into words. Hatred at least means you register. Indifference means you have become a problem to be managed, not a person to be considered. That distinction is the loneliest feeling I have ever experienced, and I have spent my whole life being good at being alone. The drive home was silent. Vivienne stared out the passenger window, composing herself back into the version she'd wear until morning. I drove through the city lights. I thought about the miscarriage we'd never spoken of again after that November. I thought about the consulting contracts I'd handed off so she could take the Denver expansion without logistical friction. I thought about the rose bushes I'd planted along our back fence that she had never once commented on in 4 years. We got home. She went to her office. I went to bed. At 2:47 inches the morning, her phone lit up on the nightstand. She'd placed it face down, which she never did. She'd said for years that she kept it face up for emergencies. Tonight was different. It buzzed again. Then again. I reached over and turned it face up. "Nathan, tonight was everything. You handled it exactly right." Then, I meant what I said. "I can't wait until you're finally done with him." Done with him. I set the phone down. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. I did not feel rage. I felt grief, the deep, quiet, irreversible kind that doesn't shout. The kind that understands this is over and simply sits with that fact in the dark. I lay completely still next to my wife, and stared at the ceiling of the bedroom where we'd slept for 7 years, and I counted every excuse I had ever made on her behalf. They all ran out at once. I got up. I went to the kitchen, made coffee with careful, mechanical hands, and I let myself finally understand what I had been half understanding for months. By 3:30, I was in my study, a small room Vivienne called my hobby corner with the tolerant amusement she reserved for things she considered beneath serious attention. That dismissal, as it turned out, had been a gift, because she had never once looked carefully at what I kept in there. In the bottom drawer, behind old tax folders and a shoebox of photographs, was a manila envelope I had assembled over the past 18 months. Not because I had suspected a specific betrayal, because I had always been methodical. because something in me had been registering a pattern before my conscious mind was willing to name it. Inside, bank statements showing large, recurring cash withdrawals from our joint account. Hotel receipts from the Kimpton Gray downtown, same suite number, booked 11 times over 8 months, always on nights Vivian had claimed to be working late. Credit card charges for restaurants I'd never heard of, a receipt for a bracelet that had never appeared in her jewelry box. I had explained every single one of these things away, one at a time, as business expenses, as client gifts, as the ordinary financial noise of an executive's life. Looking at them all together now at 3:30 inches the morning, in the sharp quiet of my study, what they added up to was undeniable. She had been funding this affair with our money. I photographed each page carefully, then put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I pulled out a sheet of the expensive linen stationery Vivienne had ordered years ago for personal correspondence she'd never gotten around to writing. She had always preferred digital. She'd always found handwritten things sentimental. I wrote for 45 minutes. By 5:15 a.m., my car was loaded. I took my father's watch. I took my external hard drive. I took my important documents. I left behind everything she had ever given me, every object that came with a string attached. I left behind a version of myself I no longer recognized. I placed the sealed envelope under the Christmas tree right where she had handed me those socks, and I walked out to my car in the pre-dawn cold of a Chicago December. The letter told her everything, that I knew about Nathan, that I knew about the hotels, that I knew about the credit card charges, that the attorney I'd consulted twice in the past year had already begun drafting documents, that there was a separate savings account she had no knowledge of, built quietly from consulting income she'd never bothered to track, holding $214,000, that the mortgage refinancing I'd handled 3 months earlier, while she was in Seattle, included a property clause in subsection 14 of the agreement she'd signed while speaking on the phone. Was the property clause ethical? That depends on your definition. I had learned from watching Vivienne for 23 years that consistency and gentleness are not, by themselves, protection. I had learned that the people who love you the most are often the ones least equipped to protect themselves from the people they love, so I had quietly stopped being unprotected. The letter ended with this: "You spent months planning to discard me. I spent years understanding that this day might come. I hope you finally understand that I was never as invisible as you believed." I signed it simply, Tom. Then I drove north. I have to be honest with you about those first hours on the road, because I think they contain something important. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free, yes, but also profoundly, achingly sad. Because what I was driving away from wasn't a bad marriage. It was what I had believed the marriage was. The version of Vivienne who cried at airport goodbyes. The woman who kept every birthday card in a shoebox. That woman had been real once, and I was grieving her as I crossed into Wisconsin in the dark, the city lights shrinking in my rearview mirror. I turned my phone on after stopping for coffee. 39 missed calls, 51 texts. The pattern of her messages was almost clinical in its progression through denial, bargaining, then somewhere around message 31, genuine panic. 8:45 a.m. Whatever you think you know, you have it wrong. Call me back. 9:20 a.m. I called the bank. What account? When did you open that? We need to discuss this. 10:41 a.m. Something is happening at the office. I can't reach Nathan. Please call me. I set my phone down and drank my coffee. I want to pause here and be straight with you, because this is the part where people always ask, was what I did next cruel? I have sat with that question for 6 months, and here is the honest answer. I contacted someone. I sent a photograph. And what happened afterward I did not cause alone. I simply made sure that consequences that were already in motion arrived at their natural destination. The photograph showed Vivienne and Nathan entering the Kimpton Gray Hotel. I had sent it addressed not to Vivienne, but to a woman named Carla Yee, Nathan's wife, pediatric physical therapist, Bucktown, married 6 years. Carla called me the next morning. "Mr. Holt," she said, her voice precise and perfectly controlled. "I think we need to meet." I had expected someone fragile, blindsided and crumbling. What I found at a coffee shop in Evanston was a woman who reminded me uncomfortably, achingly of myself. Someone who had been registering a pattern before they were ready to name it. She had a manila folder, a laptop bag, the stillness of someone who has already decided what they are going to do and is now simply executing. "Tell me everything," she said. No preamble, no tears. What Carla showed me across that table changed the shape of the story I had thought I was in. Nathan had been charging personal expenses, hotels, dinners, gifts, to a corporate card explicitly prohibited for personal use. Over 8 months, just over $13,000. Almost exactly the price of the watch on his wrist. Carla had filed for divorce that morning. Nathan would be served at Meridian's offices during the weekly staff briefing, 12 people in the room, including Vivienne. "She'll distance herself immediately," I told Carla. "When someone becomes a liability, she cuts them. It's how she operates." Carla looked at me without blinking. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." The divorce papers were served at 10:15 inches the morning. The corporate card report reached HR simultaneously. Nathan walked into that Tuesday briefing and walked out unemployed, served, and fully exposed in front of the colleagues who had watched Vivienne hand him a $14,000 watch 5 days earlier. Vivienne did exactly what I had predicted. She stood. She expressed deep concern for Nathan's personal situation. She offered him leave to handle his family crisis. She was professional, composed, utterly cold. But maintaining that version of events required her to deny all knowledge of the affair, which meant denying any knowledge of the charges she had, in fact, authorized. When HR's investigation expanded and found the authorization trail, the board began asking questions she had no clean answer to. 3 weeks after the Christmas party, Vivienne Caldwell was asked to resign from the company she had built. They gave her a severance package and an NDA. She signed it. 20 years. Gone. I heard this not from Vivienne, but from Carla, who had stayed in touch. When she sent me the message short, matter of fact, I sat with it for a long time. I had expected to feel relieved. I felt instead deeply sad. Sad for what had been, for what Vivienne had burned down, for the woman in the shoebox of birthday cards who had somehow become this other person without either of us quite noticing it happen. Nathan was charged with misappropriation of company funds 4 months later, sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation and full restitution. Carla's prenuptial agreement had protected her independently owned condo completely. He left their marriage with his personal belongings, a portion of their shared debt, and no access to stock options that wouldn't vest for another 2 years. Carla texted me the day of sentencing. "He'll have plenty of time to think now." I was painting the front porch of my Door County cabin when Vivienne's car appeared in the driveway on a Wednesday afternoon 6 months after I had left. She stepped out slowly. She was wearing jeans, flat shoes, her hair down. No power suit, no armor. She looked like someone still learning to stand without the scaffolding she'd built her whole adult life around. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Hello, Tom. How did you find me? Your lawyer mentioned you might be willing to talk." I set down my brush. I gestured to the old porch swing. She sat on it carefully, the way people sit in spaces they know aren't quite theirs. She told me about the investigation, about the board meeting, about the morning she was handed a separation agreement and a pen. She told me she had told HR she had no knowledge of Nathan's expenses, that she had positioned herself as another victim of his deception. I looked at her directly. Was that true? A long pause. "No." She looked down at her hands. "I knew every charge. I suggested half of them. And when everything fell apart, I protected myself because I didn't know how to survive what I'd done any other way." She exhaled slowly. "I threw him under the bus completely. And then I sat in my car in the parking garage for an hour because I couldn't figure out which part of myself I hated more." Silence stretched between us. The lake wind moved through the pine trees at the edge of my property. A bird called once and didn't call again. "Why, Vivienne?" I asked quietly. Not with accusation. With something closer to genuine need to understand. Why wasn't what we had enough? She was still for a long time. "Because I stopped seeing you," she finally said. "Not literally. I stopped seeing you as someone who needed things. You were so steady, so capable, so consistently there that at some point I stopped asking if you were all right. I just assumed you were fine, because you always handled everything. You never asked for anything. You never fell apart. And Nathan..." She stopped. Her voice had gone flat. "Nathan needed me. Depended on me in every direction. He looked at me like I was the most important person, in whatever room we were in." She laughed a small, humorless sound. Of course, what he actually needed was my title and my contacts. But I couldn't see that because I was too busy feeling like I mattered. You confused being wanted with being loved, I said. Yes. The word was barely audible. That's exactly what I did. We sat in the quiet for a while. I did not comfort her. I did not console her. But I also did not perform my pain for her, and I think she felt both of those things. The house is in foreclosure, she said eventually. I can't make the mortgage payments without the salary. I have the severance, but it won't carry me long. I'm going to have to start over. She looked at me with something unguarded in her eyes. At patruzeci chasse. What will you do? I don't know yet. Something smaller. Something honest. She stood slowly, smoothing her jeans. I'm not contesting the divorce. Whatever you need for the settlement, I won't fight it. I don't want anything from you, I told her. I just want it to be finished. She nodded. And then, for one moment, the composure she'd rebuilt across 6 months simply gave way. Her face opened into something raw and undefended, and very tired. You deserve someone who kept looking at you, she said. I stopped looking, and I am so sorry, Tom. I am more sorry than I know how to say. After she drove away, I sat on the porch swing for a long time and watched the light change over the water. This is what I want to tell you, and I want you to hear it as clearly as I can say it. I did not feel vindicated. I felt something much quieter and more durable than vindication. I felt done. The grief that had been sitting inside my chest since that December night had finished its work. It had done what grief does when you let it. It had cleared the ground. The mistake most people make is waiting for someone to finally see them. You cannot wait for that. You cannot keep performing patience in the hope that eventually your consistency will become visible. Respect is not withheld accidentally, and then returned through loyalty. When someone has decided you don't require it, the only honest response is to remove yourself from the equation entirely, and let them calculate what's left. What this story taught me slowly, over 6 months of coffee on a cold porch and long walks on a lake beach and evenings watching the ice form on the dock, is that starting over is not a defeat. It is a delayed arrival. It is the life you were supposed to be living, finally finding you when you stopped carrying someone else's at the cost of your own. I have a small consulting practice now. I have friends in this town who know me as Tom, not as Vivienne Caldwell's husband. I have a garden with late-season sunflowers that nobody admires but me, and somehow that feels exactly right. I sit on this porch in the evenings with a glass of wine and the particular peace of someone who has nothing to prove to anyone. I am 54 years old, and I have never been more certain of my own worth. Before I let you go, I have to ask you something. Comment 1 if you think I was right to leave without a word that night, that sometimes disappearing is the only honest response. Comment 2 if you think I should have confronted Vivienne directly the moment I found those texts, that she deserved to see my face when she understood what she'd done. Comment 3 if you think I waited far too long, that the signs were there years before the Christmas party, and I should have trusted myself sooner. I genuinely want to know where you land on that. And tell me where you are watching this, from what city, what country, what time is it where you are right now? Every single city means something to me. Have you ever been in a relationship where you kept giving more, certain that at some point it would register? Where you made yourself smaller to make room for someone else's largeness, and woke up one day unable to remember the last time anyone asked how you were doing? If that's you, if any part of this story lives in something you've been quietly surviving, I want you to know, you are not invisible to me. Leave something in the comments, even just a single word. If this story reached something in you, if it helped you see something you needed to see, please subscribe. There are more stories coming. Human stories. The kind that are uncomfortable and honest and always end somewhere worth arriving. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Chicago, Illinois to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.